In this video, we are going to see the summary and analysis of Henry Howard's poem, London Has Thou Accursed Me? London Has Thou Accursed Me is a poem written by Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey. He was an English nobleman, politician and poet who was born in 1517 at HAST, Hertfordshire. He was one of the founders of English Renaissance poetry who, along with Sir Thomas Wyatt, introduced the styles and meters of the Italian humanist poets into England. He was a cousin of Queen Anne Boleyn and Queen Catherine Howard, wives of King Henry VIII. During his period, Henry Howard earned the hatred of the king and was arrested and beheaded on Tower Hill, London on 19th January 1547. Henry Howard wrote this poem while he was in the Fleet Prison, London. The poem consists of 68 lines in iambic tetrameter. It is an autobiographical poem which reflects a real incident occurred in the life of Henry Howard. It is written in the first person and personifies London, addressing the city in the second person. When he was 26 years old, he was accompanied by a group of drunken companions through the streets of London during the Lenten season, causing some troubles to the citizens. So, he was locked up and accused of breaking the Lenten fast, rioting, and assaulting the citizens. In this poem, the poet attempts to justify his behavior and his actions that has resulted in his being locked up. Rather than admitting that he did wrong, he starts blaming the victim and arguing that the fault lies in the immorality of London and its people. The poem, which begins, London has thou accursed me of breach of laws, the root of strife, strongly says that the poet was not really breaking the laws of the city of London, but he was trying to warn its people of the approaching wrath of God for their own lawlessness. In this poem, he says that London is a city filled with sins, wickedness, corruption, immorality, and all sorts of other vices. On seeing the citizens of London having all the vices, the poet says his heart boils very hot. The abundance of immorality and sins within the walls of London turns the poet to lose his fear on the rules and orders of the nation. Then he says that the preachers can correct and transform the people through their words of preaching. But he has no hope in it, and so he has expressed his hidden worries by unknown ways. According to him, no one can escape from the justice rod or before God on the day of judgment. The poet accuses that in London all sort of wrong unjust works badly remain in a very silent way. This turns him very carefree and makes him to walk through the streets of London with his drunken companions during the Lenten season in the secret silence of a night, creating disturbance to the public. Here the poet blames London for his actions and warns London that the downfall of London is not far off. In this poem, the poet not only accuses the city of London, but he curses the city also. He says that the anger of God will wrap around London very soon by various ways, such as the fearful loud noise of thunder, sudden flame of lightning, the soundless fall of pebblestones, and the dreadful disease of plague. Again, he blames London by saying that the pride and lofty works of London and its citizens have made London to earn a lot of hatred from others, but the city tries to offend others. The angry experience of each cruel, merciless thought conceives the righteous or morally right acts in the end at a higher range. The poet says that the people of London are very lazy in their work and very slow in their mindset. They are very greedy in earning wealth and riches by illegal ways. Their spirits may live to heaven, but their goods or things obtained by illegal ways live in great fear to see what is going to happen to them. The poet bitterly says that the city of London is filled with people having all vices, such as lechers, gluttons, drunkards, and so on. Even though they are aware of the consequences of sins, they indulge in lust and loathsome vices. The intention of the poet is to arouse God against the immorality of London and its citizens, having all vices. The poet opines that the city of London is clothed with falsehood and unright, and the proud citizens don't fear about the fall of the city. In this poem, in the following lines, the poet mentions London as shameless whore, member of false Babylon, the shop of craft, and the den of ire. He wants London, saying that the city is covered with falsehood, craftiness, and error, and all these vices lead the city to a dreadful doom. The martyrs in heaven and earth are also waiting for the call of justice, and that the poet pleads to hear the fair desire of those people. Now the poet requests the Lord to give a fair judgment to London and its citizens. He curses the city by saying that the flame of wrath will soon fall on it, famine and pest will soon strike on all lechers there, and the proud towers and high turrets there will soon beat stone from stone. Further, he says that due to the existence of immorality, injustice, craftiness, haughtiness, etc., there in abundance, the idols will be burnt and no one will worry about its ruin. During the fall of the city, no one will worry because no one except the virtuous or righteous shall remain. In the last three lines of the poem, the poet begs the God to deliver a wise judgment to London as he had given to Babylon. In the last line, immortal praise with one accord, the poet pleads the Lord to give a fair judgment to London with an everlasting or never to be forgotten reward or punishment for the existence of immorality in abundance there. This poem predicts the apocalyptic fall of London. In this poem, Henry Howard argues that London is a modern Babylon and his behavior was actually a righteous rebuke to an immoral city. He was not ready to accept that he did wrong. Instead, he accuses London, the victim, and argues that the fault lies in the immorality of London and its citizens. In this autobiographical poem, the poet has used frequent end rhymes but in an irregular pattern. It is written in stichic form, which is an opposition to stanzaic form. This poem was probably written in 1543 but first printed by Knott in 1816. When Henry Howard and some of his boon companions were imprisoned in Fleet Prison, London, on the double charge of eating meat during Lent and of walking in a lewd and unseemly manner in the night about the streets of London and breaking with stone bows of certain windows. This poem was written by him when he was inside the prison. We can find a lot of biblical allusions in this poem, like a figure of the Lord's biggest and an enumeration of the 7 deadly sins: pride, envy, wrath, sloth, greed, lechery, and gluttony. In the end of the poem, the poet predicts none thy ruin shall bemoan, because no one except the righteous shall remain. The criticism of this poem is of two types. Some see it as a lark, but others as something serious. Some critics claim that Henry Howard wrote this poem to reflect his mood with which he had enjoyed his revels, and others point to its intricate and sophisticated qualities and structure. The satire is, of course, mock serious. Thank you for listening.